Well, I know that a lot of us have created rooms and doll houses for our 18-inch dolls, whether it's just room sets for photography like I do, or for those of you that have made complete doll houses for your 18-inch dolls. And my feeling has always been, by having plants in a room, it makes it more homey. So today we're taking simple computer paper and wire and paint and glue and a few other materials, and we are creating some very realistic and lifelike looking snake plants. So just stay tuned and see how easy and fun this is to do. Alright, so first we're going to create our plant pot. And for our plant pot today, I'm using one of these little plastic disposable, I think they're referred to as a condiment cup. It's about 2 inches across and not quite 2 inches tall, so it translates to a good size for a little plant pot for a house plant. And I'm going to show you a painting technique that I love. It'll make this look really good. It'll protect the paint. So I've got just any color ceramic coat. This one is Avalon Blue. I don't know if this paint's even available anymore. And for this, we're just going to squeeze some paint in here. You could get fancy. You could paint a design on the inside, but we're painting the inside of the pot. That's going to do a couple of things. And my brush is really wet, so it's thinning the paint down quite a bit. That's because I've been using this brush all day on a couple of different projects. I'm working on a couple of different projects for my different channels. But try and get a really good coat. This will not be our final coat of paint, but this is the coat, the only coat that will show when we're done. And get it up in the rim. The bottom, you probably want to have painted too. And we're going to go up all the way to the rim. I'm going to actually wipe it off the rim when I get done, but we're going to go up to the rim. Alright. Don't go too heavy. That's a mistake that I make a lot. Well, actually, I think I'll just go ahead and paint the rim this way. It'll look a little different there than on the sides, but that's okay. So, paint this. Oops, I've got a spot I can see through. Look from both from the outside and from the inside. If you need to, give it a second light coat of paint and let this dry. When this is dry, I'll be back and we'll put the next coat on. Alright, this blue paint is pretty much dry, and I don't think I'm going to do a second coat on this one. I think it'll look okay, but it's not completely opaque because colored paint isn't. Black paint, however, is pretty opaque, and I don't want to take a chance on the foam I'm going to use to hold this together showing through. Whoa, I've got clumps in my paint. So I've got black craft paint. Not going to go up over the edge. I'm going to stay underneath that lip. You can go a little bit because we are going to cover that with our soil. The bottom is optional. If you have enough paint to paint the bottom, cool. If not, I wouldn't worry about it because that's not really going to show much, but usually it will settle down in the bottom anyway. So now this paint needs to dry before we can glue our foam in. While the glue inside of our planter dries, we are going to go on to assembling our leaves for our plants. And for that, I've actually created a PDF. It's a 2-page PDF. The link to this will be on the blog post that goes with this video. It's for personal use only, something I created for the blog, for the video, and it's the snake plant leaves. You need to print both sheets, and you need to keep these together, and I'm going to show you the process of making those. The important thing to do before you start this little test square down here. There's a 1-inch square on both pages. If you print this at 100% on your printer on a standard 8.5 by 11 page, it should print out correctly. But double check, excuse all the paint on my nails, double check that this measures an inch. If it measures an inch square, then you're good to go. So now we are going to assemble these leaves. There's a dozen leaves total for our snake plant on the 2 pages. And what we need to do, we need a container. And I like to use Mod Podge for my assembly. So I poured in. I never use out of the jar. I always pour into a container in case like this is printed on an inkjet printer. It's going to get ink on the brush. I don't want to contaminate my whole jar of Mod Podge with ink off of this. So I always use a little container. This is just a little applesauce tub. We also need some wire. We need 3 or 4 strands of, see, this is 18-inch or 18 gauge floral wire that I bought a long time ago. Something about 18 gauge. You'll need wire cutters. You will need your Mod Podge, your paintbrush, someplace to put your leaves while they're drying. I'm using this block that I made a long time ago. I actually have a YouTube video on my other channel, and I'll try to remember to link it in the blog post if you want to make one of these, if you do stuff where you need to dry stuff. It's really handy, and I'll show you how it works. But what we're going to do, and you'll need scissors, and I like to work on a ceramic tile and have some wet wipes handy. You'll see why here as I work. It keeps everything neater. So I'm going to start with page 1. I'm only going to do a couple on camera, and then I'm going to turn the camera off and get the rest done. So you'll notice the leaves are in pairs. Each one of those pairs is actually going to create one leaf. So like the first 2, they're each right next to each other. That's why I only work 1 leaf at a time. I only cut it. I don't cut these apart. If you cut them apart, just stack them up by size, because there's various sizes. But cut these out right on the line. And if you cut them out carefully, you shouldn't need to trim later. And hopefully I've got the camera back far enough that you guys can see what we're doing. And this is just how I do it. Go ahead, do that, and then I measure my wire. What I want my wire, that end of my wire is kind of crooked, so I'm going to start from this end. I'm going to measure it up there, and I'm going to give myself a couple of inches. We're going to cut this off later, and I'm going to have to retrieve that off the floor. So this is longer than it needs to be, and that's what I want. Now, I'm using the side that has the printing on it for the inside of the leaf. That's the side I'm putting the Mod Podge on. If you don't have Mod Podge, you could thin down tacky glue with water, or you could use Elmer's glue. It uses quite a bit of glue, so I started out on my prototype one using tacky glue and moved to Mod Podge pretty quickly. All right, now I need to get this lifted up. Make sure don't let it sit too long or it's going to stick. Now, line the wire up the center, and yeah, this is going to feel really flimsy right now, but by the time we put a couple of coats of paint on, it's going to be fine. And if you don't have lights on, it probably won't stick as badly. I've got a light right next to it. Line these up. Get them lined up so they are square, so they're straight. The wire goes pretty much down the center, and then stick them in here to dry. Then I like to wipe my tile off between every pair. Otherwise, that tile gets really gunky really fast. Then the next pair. Again, cut out right on that line. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it pretty close because you want these to be the same size. And just that's why I put them in pairs on the paper. But being able to do PDFs, I think, is going to open up a whole realm of possibilities for projects on my channel. I'm really excited about some of the things that we'll probably be able to do with PDFs. All right, now, again, oops, don't forget to cut the wire. So, again, you don't have to measure exactly. Like I said, it's going to be cut off later because we're not going to use anywhere near that much out the bottom later. But it's just the longer tail makes it so much easier to do the next couple of steps. When you're painting the leaves, you're going to be glad you have that extra tail. Yeah, I'm really noticing a difference here under my lights because I did my other set of leaves that I did earlier to make sure this was going to all fit together. I did those without all the lights on and they didn't stick at all. All right, that's all you do, is stick it in the block to dry. So I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to finish up these leaves, let the Mod Podge dry, and it will only take a few minutes. Probably by the time you get all of them cut and glued and your brush cleaned out, everything will be dry enough to move on to the next step. So when I get this all cut out and all put together, I will be back and we'll move on to painting our leaves. Alright, so these are all glued together, and don't worry that they are kind of flimsy feeling when they're wet. They'll be fine because we're going to put a couple of coats of paint on there yet, and I'm going to put a clear finish on, but you can see after they dry, they're already a lot more firm. Now, if you don't have a block like this, you could put them into a piece of like styrofoam or anything. I like this because I can even put a spray glaze on at the end, which I'm going to do, and that won't affect this block. So next, we're going to put the base color of paint on. So I've got my same little dish. I just washed it out, and I've got a dark green. This one is actually forest green from Ceramicoat. Ceramicoat is my favorite brand of paint, and the majority of my acrylic paints are Ceramicoat. Again, I never work directly out of here. The only time I do is if I'm just using a tiny bit, and then I'll work out of the lid. So grab your first leaf and just paint. You don't want a very thick coat, but you want to cover up the paper. And the beauty of this is it's almost the same color as the stems, but the stems aren't going to show on this particular plant. We're actually embedding them all the way to the bottom of the leaf. You get that done, put it back in here, and just continue. And again, by the time you get the first coat done and everything cleaned up, you'll only have to wait 5-10 minutes before it's probably dry enough to go on to the next coat. And this is the same brush I used for the glue. I just washed it out really well. Be sure to wash your brush out every time really well. But I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to paint all these leaves with this dark green base coat. When I get that done, I'll come back and we'll start on the next step. Alright, so everything is painted green now, and they don't have to look perfect, but you'll notice that they are, if you do get to this step on yours, they're a lot firmer. With every coat of paint, they're going to be a little more firm. Same container, I'm actually using the bottom this time because I don't need very much. What we need is a kind of grayed down medium to light green. I like this color better, but I had a lot of trouble with that paint. So I'm going to use this one. This is Village Green. It's a little lighter than I would like, but it will be okay. A little bit of that. For a brush for this step, you want something that's fairly firm and really thin. This little angled brush is really good. So I'm going to take and just a little bit of paint. And you're just going to do this up both sides. You don't want it dark, you don't want it really noticeable. Whoops, that's a little dark there, but it'll be okay. If it's too dark, it can be on. You can strategically place the leaf where it's not going to show as much. Yes, I'm just going back and forth and just making lines. These want to be horizontal lines, and they want to be pretty straight, but they don't want to be solid. These plants come in all sizes, anywhere from just a foot or so tall to like 4 feet tall. So I kind of based this plant on the one I have in my living room. It's in about the same, translates to about the same size pot, so I figured it would be a good size. And it's one plant that even I don't kill on a very regular basis, and I am really known for killing plants. So just a little dab of paint. And I'm going to turn the camera off and finish this up, and then by the time I'm done, this should, and get my brush cleaned up, this should be dry. So when I get these all done and they're dry, I'll be back and we'll go to the next step. Alright, we're momentarily going to go back to our pot. Now I did notice on one side I apparently didn't have enough blue there, and I ended up with the black showing, but that's okay. I'm not too worried about that. So we are going to fill this now with some foam. And what I've got some of this pink Builder's insulation foam. I use this a lot. I'm trying to get my piece used up. You could use regular styrofoam for this, but you do need a foam of some kind. And tacky glue plays really nicely with foam. And I did wait until my paint was fairly dry. Now, I've got a piece cut that will kind of fill the bottom. And I cut this piece. This will do two things. It will give us something to stick our plant into when we get it done, when we get ready to plant it. And it also gives us some place to spread our soil on. Okay, I need a little piece wedged in there. These little pieces don't really need to be glued in. And this is probably good enough. So I'm going to pick up my styrofoam that's on my desk, throw away the little bits, and now I should have brought another brush. Since I don't have a brush, I will use a toothpick, because I've only got the brush I need for the paint. This is just any dark brown acrylic paint. This one happens to be espresso. And we want a pretty good coat of this. We want to cover up all the visible pink. It's okay if it gets over on the edge of the pot even. But you don't want to see any pink anymore. This is in case we can see through what we are using for soil later. Alright, now this paint needs to get completely dry before we can move on with it. So, back to our plants. Now, they all have these little lines on them. Next step, we're going to add the little yellow rim around each leaf. This is optional depending on which variety of snake plant you have, or mother-in-law's tongue is another name for this plant. This one I want a fairly kind of softish brush, but fairly small. And this paint, by the way, this is Ceramic Coat Bright Yellow, and it happens to be a translucent paint, which I kind of like for this step, but you could use any yellow. I like the slight translucency of this one because it doesn't look quite as bright when it dries. I'm going to go up one, apply the paint from one side. Oops. And my plant that I've got happens to have this on every leaf, so, and it has the little grayish green lines. And I know not all of them do. Now turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. And you don't want this to be even. You want it to be a little bumpy looking. And this will hide some of your, if you've had any mistakes when you glued together. And this is why it's so nice to have the longer stems, because you've got a handle. So once again, I am going to turn the camera off. I'm going to do this off camera. I'll get all of these done. And then I'm actually going to, once this paint is dry, I'm going to spray mine with a matte sealer. I prefer a spray-on sealer for this. I think it gives a better coat. It's a little lighter, but it makes the paint look more finished. It makes the plant look just not so much like it's paper with acrylic paint. So once this paint is dry and the sealer's dry, I'll be back and we can go to the next step. Alright, so off to the side I have all the leaves. They're all dried and I've sorted them by size because we're going to need them by size here in a moment. Before we do the next step, we need to have everything in place that we'll need to put the leaves in, because once we do the glue and the soil on top of here, we're going to need to work quickly. We want these in before it starts to dry. So to do that, wire cutters, because we will need to trim some of these. They were much easier to work with when they were oversized, but now we need to cut them so they'll fit in here correctly. We also, you might want to have a toothpick. With the 18 gauge wire, I haven't had any issues getting through the foam, but just in case, I like to have one. Now, we are going to add our soil. For doll stuff, what I use is dried coffee grounds. These are coffee grounds that have been used and then completely dried in the oven. I keep them in this jar with holes in the lid. That way, if there's any moisture left in, they continue to dry out. What I do is I dump a morning's worth of coffee grounds into like a pie plate, and I keep them in the oven while I'm doing polymer clay. I try to do this, dry these on a day when I'm doing a lot of polymer clay. So I've got my oven already on at a fairly low temperature for quite a while, so that allows those to get dry. Then I let them cool completely before I transfer them. I'm working on top of a piece of printer paper, so any extra that I pour over here, I can immediately put back in my jar and put away. I'm using tacky glue. The tacky glue is going to not only hold our soil in place, it's also going to help hold our plant in place. This is pretty much how I pot all doll and miniature plants that I make potted. You want a good coat. You want that really covered. Then use a toothpick or something similar to spread it out. If you have gaps at the edge of your foam, make sure you've got glue over them. Okay. If you've got like there's a spot that doesn't want to, the glue will dry clear eventually. It'll take it a while because we're putting on a pretty thick coat. But by spreading this out really well and making sure everything's coated, we're trying to make sure that we never see that foam. Alright, that looks good. Throw the toothpick away and just pour this over. And I've been using coffee grounds as soil in dollhouse miniatures for over 20 years, probably close to 30, and I've never had an issue, but I always make sure they are really, really thoroughly dry before I use them. There. Now, if we go any further, we've got to work quickly, but I want to get this taken care of, so it's going to get all over my crafter. All right, that off to the side. Put the lid back on here. Now, starting with our tallest leaves. I'm going to kind of start by doing this. I'm kind of curving them at the bottom. This one is a little tall. It's not a lot tall, but a little bit. Try to aim for pretty close to the center. And you'll have some resistance as you hit where your two pieces of foam, because I had to put a double stack of foam because of the height of my container. So I'm feeling a little bit of resistance when I hit that, but it will push through. That one's fine. And these just kind of grow pretty much around each other. This one definitely needs to be shorter. And that wire is going to fly, so try and keep it contained. Sometimes I even do that in a paper bag or something. Go around. I double checked what my plant looked like before I started. If you don't have a snake plant, look online. There's lots of photos of them, and they come in other combinations of colors. Some of them don't have the yellow on the outside. Some have more pronounced white lines. I've even had one that didn't have any lining on it. It was just a plain green. But I like this variety. This looks more like the one I've got, and this is the one I prefer the way it looks. And each one of these is going to look different. But in real life, they all look different too, because they're, you know, they grow differently depending on their conditions and the lighting and everything. And I'm continuing to, whoops, I'm off camera, continuing to do this as I go, because they do curl inward a little bit. The ones towards the outside may need to be a little shorter because our container does slope down. Saving the shortest leaf for the very last. That one's short enough, I think. Let's see, I want to put this one right here. Some stems go straight up, some go a little bit of an angle. And now, after this one goes in, and it's okay if they lean out like this, I like that look. I want this one to sit right here. Now, this glue needs to dry because, like I said, it's helping to hold our plant into the pot. We don't want to disturb that until that starts to dry, but we will need to do some bending of our leaves. So I'm going to let this dry for a few hours and then I'll be back. Alright, so here's the one we just made, and here's one I made up earlier to test my pattern. And you can see it has a lot more life to it because I have moved things around. And this one is really solid because I made this one yesterday. And you can move, because you've got the 18 gauge wire. I'm going to go ahead and move these. These are set up. They've been in here for probably 2 hours, probably an hour. Now, if you do poke through, just touch it up with some paint. You will have a spot there where the wire ends that it might try to poke through if you bend it in the wrong spot. But see, you just kind of manhandle this and get it moved. If these pop out on you, you can stick them back in their hole. If they won't stay in, just put some glue on it and stick it back in. But that is our snake plant, and I love how this came out. This one, my foam was a little too big that I put in, and it kind of made a dent in this, but I'll just display it with the other side front. But that is our project. I hope you enjoyed this. Remember to check the blog post for the PDF download so that you can make it. No measuring, you can just glue them together and cut them out. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see pictures of these plants in your dolls' rooms. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.